I'm a research fellow at HFS. I'm here today with Ron Walker, who is the U.S. leader for managed services for KPMG. HFS has been a research partner with KPMG on understanding and forecasting the demand characteristics of managed services, both in the United States and globally. Today, we want to explore in depth topics associated with managed services consumption, how managed services differ from traditional outsourcing. Just note that 62% of enterprises see it as distinct based on research we've done, and the role of technology in supporting managed services deployment. But first to Ron, the most important question I think is how do we define managed services? So, how does KPMG define managed services today? And what are some of the leading edge examples that KPMG is doing in working with clients around new sources of value? And maybe parenthetically, how does KPMG differentiate its managed services offering in the market from legacy outsourcers and other Big Four competitors?
I guess I'd say managed service, as we've all been, it's really been evolving. And I'd say how KPMG probably best defines it is we consider it the concept of when we are participating in the plan, the build, and the management of an end-to-end process over an extended period of time. And that could be really a part of the client operations, and it's usually outcome driven, Don. So I would say how we differentiate ourselves is we really do intend to become a part of the client's own services. So we participate in strategic meetings and sessions, and we add our own input and advice, and vice versa, where we use and incorporate clients' intelligence to help with our other clients. So I'd say that's probably how we broadly define managed services as it is today. And that translates into probably several different of our offerings, right? When we look at, if you look at, KPMG's kind of brand in the market, it's certainly a part of that trusted area. So when we look at, cybersecurity, for example, so identity management or managed detection and response areas, those are really differentiators because we become a part of that client and we bring not only our own intelligence, but what's happening in the client locations and databases full of different threats that come about.
So you see, Ron, this subject matter expertise as a critical component in KPMG's value around managed services.
Yeah, it's critical. I mean, we're not just coming in and understanding what the client's challenges, issues are, and applying kind of an ad hoc solution. We're bringing our experience, from our consultants, hundreds of years of cumulative experience, as well as our database and technology associated with those specific solutions. So
So it's more than just, if we think of services that providers offer today, a lot of this is very transactionally oriented. So you're kind of defining managed services as that end-to-end capability, linking process to delivery with strong subject matter expertise. Is that kind of the value proposition that you're describing?
it is, and I'll take it even further, is you
Okay.
have to understand not only the industry, but the client. So each client
Yes.
has
Yeah.
specific politics and areas of understanding. And so the more time we spend in a client and with that management team, the better we understand their needs and can respond. And that is particularly true. And you'd asked this before, and I'll answer it again, is in financial services and in big tech, that is required for us to operate effectively and truly adding value. We have to understand those client environments and specifically what's taking place in them on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. 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 I mean, I see that as important because one of the reasons for managed services in the first place is to be more business outcomes driven
Right.
in terms of delivery versus, let's say, more outsourcing based cost reduction.
Right.
And I'd argue that it's very hard to drive that outcomes mindset if you don't have that strong industry functional process understanding and client understanding going in.
Right.
So I think that's a distinction between KPMG and maybe more traditional legacy providers of services across different industries.
Right. And I'll even add to that is we make a significant investment in those client experiences, Don, whereas, we plan on being with a client for the life cycle. So our consulting and I should
Yeah.
manage service practice, but certainly outsourcing too, is invested in, and we spend the time and money and effort in understanding the challenges because we know that that's going to pay off for both of us, both the client and
Right.
KPMG in the long run.
What do you see, and how does KPMG view the role of Gen AI as a disruptor and maybe enabler
Mhm.
of managed services delivery, and maybe as a differentiator? I know, we work with Steve Chase and Cliff Justice. We understand the impact that KPMG wants to bring to the market through AI.
Yeah.
This,
It's all of those things that you mentioned. Obviously, it's a disruptor, it's an enabler. And we're getting accustomed to what it can truly drive. I mean, I think we're in the midst of 40 plus significant pilots or initiatives right now that we're working across with specifically directly with clients and or
yeah,
industries right now. And I think what we're trying to ascertain is small scale because it's there, and the AI at small scale and on a tactical basis, we can see, tremendous benefits. But back to the same challenge we had with, automation and RPA is can we put together large scale initiatives? And I think that Gen AI is going to enable us to do that. So we at KPMG are investing significant dollars. So you mentioned Steve and Cliff and what they're doing, and we are client zero. So both KPMG as well as our managed services are client zero in many of our initiatives. And I think one of them, it's turning out to be tremendously valuable, is the suspicious activity reporting that we're doing for financial services. So it's kind of called SAR reporting, right? Where we're trying to detect fraud. And in one of our client examples last year, there was over 4 million incidents where this takes place. And we're using, there's automation techniques that you can identify, but it takes anywhere from 45 minutes to 2 hours for an analyst to respond to these typically. And what we found is we've reduced that response rate using Gen AI be anywhere between 30 and 45%. And not only is it just a reduction in the time to respond to that, the quality of those responses are in greater depth because we've trained the models with some of our best analysts and how they respond to that. So it's faster too. So we're reducing the time frame, we're reducing the speed with which we identify the area, and then the quality on what tactics to take.
so it's interesting. So this transformation, we think many times AI providing transformation to the process itself, but it's also transformation to people and organizations and how KPMG as a whole can deliver, you're citing 30 to 70% greater efficiency, but I'd argue in the long term that might translate into 30 to 70% greater value and financial outcomes ultimately. So
Well, therein lies the
that's
trick, right? Is
yeah,
as we develop these technologies and capabilities, because it's not inconsequential, is the cost associated with developing and training models. So we can't just simply lower our price in order to respond to this. So it's back to kind of a value quotient for our clients. And I'll point back to the example I gave you with the SAR reporting. Not only is it faster and cheaper, but the quality of those responses are better.
so coming back on the point you were just making about the linkage between managed services and consulting to drive ongoing value, especially in regulatory risk compliance. What are some of, could you cite again maybe some other examples where this linkage between consulting, advisory, and managed services is really at the nexus of the value that KPMG brings? Because I think this is, there's many companies that provide different levels of managed services.
Our consultants can be much more valuable the better they know that specific client environment, not just knowing the challenging solution. So so we are able to work with and engage in that client on a regular basis. The ability for us to work with the consulting team and get them to understand the environment more closely, the better they are to serve our clients and value that. And we've quantified this anywhere from a 10 to 14 times pull through when we have a good relationship managed services with the client and our
Mm,
consulting organization, because we, as a managed service entity, understand the client. And then we'll constantly, when our client asks for, or we proactively identify areas of opportunity to enhance, we
yeah,
bring the right teams there. And then vice
yeah,
versa, when our teams come in, they're identifying additional areas of value that the client
yeah.
may want to expand upon. and
yeah.
drive into a managed service.
Just to finish up, if you were to maybe highlight two or three industries and two or three things that companies should be doing immediately with managed services. I mean, is there something that you can point to in consumer goods, financial services, pharmaceutical, that
Sure.
companies should just be immediately looking at, broadly? So,
I've mentioned, so more broadly, anything as it relates to cybersecurity is
yes,
an absolute immediate need. Most organizations don't have the depth, the talent, and the tools to really address the
yeah,
ongoing issues of cybersecurity risk that's out there. So identity management, management detection and response,
yeah, yeah,
that ability. And you can't just have a managed service. You also need the access to true experts to come in because organizations will have an event and they will require significant support that's out there. We've talked about in regulatory and response. So cyber is across the board, all industries.
right, right,
In financial services, specifically, the regulatory requirements that they're being
yeah,
asked on a regular basis to respond to, you need a managed service organization that understands your organization because it runs the gamut. Banking and financial institutions and SEC requirements. It is crazy on what is required of our financial institutions right now, and for organizations to respond themselves across the board there, they can't do it on an effective basis. So I think
right.
managers there. And then we throw out some things along the lines like, well, what we haven't talked about is in the government space, so it's federal
Yes,
and local,
yes,
things along the lines of like grants management. So when there is a
right,
natural disaster and you get funds coming from the government, there is a requirement to actually manage those funds and distribute them to the right entities at the right level and prevent fraud. This is a giant, and as our
it's giant.
yeah,
Yeah, it's
giant.
giant. Yeah,
And that's an area where we've actually developed some specific technology using AI, as well as understanding the specific entities that we've talked about, to where there's a huge value here where states can't respond quick enough, or cities or municipalities can't respond quickly enough to get these in place. And in order to use the funds properly, I mean, the funds may not get distributed if it's not there. So there's a huge opportunity in the government sector for things along those lines.
yeah,
And I think we've talked in the past, things along the lines of intelligent forecasting across industries.
yeah,
Learning management is one that's coming up. So it's really hard for organizations to deploy the right technology in a cost effective basis globally to help with learning management. So those are some of the
yeah,
areas
yeah, yeah.
that are out there that are high value.
With that, Ron, thank you very much for your time today. This has been very insightful and enlightening for me, and I hope for our audience. So we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Don.
My pleasure.